Thank you guys for coming, and we're going to start our presentation now. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Debbie Nicole, and I am Kent County Master Gardener, and I'm also the chairperson of the workshop committee. And I am here today to talk to you about growing sweet potatoes at home. We're going to talk specifically about how to do this in your home garden in small spaces rather than as a commercial production. Today we're going to cover the selection of sweet potatoes and varieties. We'll talk about propagation, planting, care and maintenance, a little bit about pests and diseases, how to harvest, how to cure and store your harvest, and also a little bit of information about the nutritional values and recipes for your sweet potatoes that you've grown. A sweet potato, you can see the scientific name here, Ipomoea batata, also known as creeping yam or kumara. I'll tell you in a minute where that name came from. And sweet potatoes are in the same family as morning glories. That's why the flowers, if you see the blooms that appear on the sweet potato plants, look very similar to a morning glory flower. That's not a coincidence. They are in the same family. Sweet potatoes are not yams. Yams are in a completely different family. Sweet potatoes are native to Central and South America. So they're an American native plant. And yams are actually native to Africa. They are not the same thing. Now, yams are not anywhere as nice to eat as sweet potatoes are. So just a quick little history, some interesting facts for you. Sweet potatoes were first consumed as food way back in 750 BC in South America. The Polynesian explorers traveled around, hit South America, picked up some sweet potatoes, and actually took them to New Zealand. So they're very popular in New Zealand, which is where the word kumara comes from. That's what the Maori Polynesian explorers who landed in New Zealand called them. So if you ever hear or see that name, that's how that came about. Sweet potatoes were cultivated as food before white potatoes were ever used. And they were actually just called potatoes until the 1740s, when they differentiated between white potatoes and sweet potatoes. And those candied sweet potatoes that I don't know if your parents made them or if you made them. My mom always made these for Thanksgiving with the marshmallows and brown sugar all over the top, and they were all goopy and syrupy, and I didn't like them. I actually didn't like sweet potatoes until my adult years, when I had the opportunity to get nice fresh sweet potatoes. Now, why would anyone want to grow sweet potatoes in Delaware? As you can see, this is me in the picture with my first harvest of sweet potatoes from my garden. It made me very happy to dig under the ground in the fall and find these beautiful sweet potatoes that I had grown. They were very easy to grow. They're very low maintenance. They are very nutritious food. I started growing them because my husband requested it, actually. He wanted me to make him some sweet potato fries after he had them at a restaurant. So that's how I got started growing these. There's many different ways to cook them, not just candied sweet potatoes. And the really cool thing is you can use those to start the slips for your next year's crop. So they're pretty self-sufficient, and I am going to get into how to do that later. Sweet potatoes are actually perennial plants since they're tropical plants in zones 9 to 12. They grow all year round because there's no frost to kill them. But they can actually be grown as annuals as far north as New England, and some of my Canadian friends have told me that they've grown them up there. It's a little more work because the soil has to be heated up first with black plastic. If any of you guys are joining us today, I know we had some people from New Hampshire register. you will probably have to do a little extra work in the spring to warm up your soil and keep your potatoes, sweet potato plants protected. So a little extra work. Okay, the first thing you need to think about is where are you going to plant your sweet potatoes and what do you need to do to get ready? The soil requirements is probably the pickiest thing for sweet potatoes. Even though sweet potatoes tolerate a soil pH between 5.5 and 6.8, ideally the optimum pH for sweet potatoes is between 5.8 and 6.0. So that's perfection. If your soil is too acidic, if your pH is too low, you can add a little bit of lime to raise it up. If your soil pH is too high, you can add sulfur to lower it. So those are the recommendations for adjusting that pH, but you need to do that well ahead of time before you think about planting your sweet potatoes. The best soil for sweet potatoes is well drained. Very important that it's well drained. You don't want wet soil because that can cause so many problems, especially in Delaware where we have these wet, humid springs and summers. The soil should be fairly light and loamy to sandy type soils. If your soil has too much clay and it's too rich and heavy, you might get a lot of tiny, puny little sweet potatoes because they have a hard time growing in heavy soil, growing to large sizes. If your soil is too light and too sandy, you might get less sweet potatoes, but bigger, better quality sweet potatoes. So you want to get that happy medium. In both cases, if your soil is too heavy or if your soil is too light, compost, working compost into that soil about an inch before you plant, and getting that soil loosened up a little bit is very helpful in adjusting those soil conditions. As far as watering goes, water about an inch per week, but you want to stop watering about 3 or 4 weeks before harvesting to prevent the tubers from splitting. And I want to mention something about water because we get this question a lot when we say an inch of water, because that's a very common recommendation for all vegetable gardens, an inch of water a week. And people have always asked us, well, how do you know if you're getting an inch of water a week? If you get rain, you don't really know unless you have some kind of a rain gauge where you can tell how much rain you got. But a good way of calculating how much water, if you need to irrigate your sweet potatoes, 1 inch a week means that if you have, for every square foot of garden, you need to think that's 144 square inches. And a 1 inch high would be 1 inch of water. So if you take that unit and change it to gallons, which I have done, it takes about 0.6234 gallons per square foot of your garden space per week. So that's a way of thinking about it. For example, I had my sweet potatoes that first year in a 4x4 raised bed. So if I multiply that out, I get the 10 gallons per week of water is what that bed will need. So the other good thing is to make sure that you have good drainage, because if your water is standing there, if you have poor drainage, you get large, misshapen, cracked, and rough-skinned, poor quality sweet potatoes. Also potential for a lot of fungal diseases, as we see a lot here in Delaware. Sun, as much sun as they can get. They don't like shade, they want full sun. 8 to 10 hours a day in the summer is awesome, at least. So try not to plant them in a shady area under trees. They need a lot of sun. They like heat, they like sun. So containers, you can grow them in the ground, of course, but if you choose to use containers, my entire garden, as you can see in this picture, is raised beds. So on the right side of this photo is a 2x12 raised bed full of sweet potatoes, sweet potato vines that have filled it up. It works out great. It's easy to control the drainage when you have a raised bed, because I have little holes, drainage holes in the sides of mine, so excess water can drain out. And The other options, as you can see on the left, this is a grow bag. And we're going to talk about a variety of sweet potato that works really well in grow bags, but they can be grown in containers, in grow bags. If you live in an HOA or in a neighborhood where you can't have a garden, these can be grown successfully in grow bags or containers on a deck or patio. So that's good news for you. As far as the soil preparation goes, as I said earlier, you want to work in some compost is the best thing that you can do to get your soil ready. Okay, once your garden beds are all ready to go, you need to decide, make a decision what kind of sweet potatoes you want to grow. Believe it or not, there's more than just your regular old orange sweet potatoes out there. You can choose to grow your traditional red or orange varieties. Also, there are some really good white sweet potato varieties, and we'll talk about one of those in a minute. There are also purple sweet potatoes. So I have grown those in my garden. There's all kinds of other different colors. I like Japanese sweet potatoes, which are purple skin, but the inside is a nice creamy yellow, and they're delicious. So people are often asking me, do I know about this kind of sweet potato or that kind of sweet potato? But in truth, since there are almost 7,000 different varieties of sweet potatoes, I can't possibly know everything about every one of them. So if you are looking at a particular type of sweet potato, I have a link here, which I also sent you in the email with the Zoom link. There was a document there that had this link. So this is a nice chart that gives a lot of information about a lot of different kinds of sweet potatoes. So you might want to check that out while you're working on making your decision what type of sweet potatoes you want to grow. So I picked out one of each color to focus on. So as far as orange sweet potatoes go, I chose to tell you about Jewel sweet potatoes. These are another one you'll see out at stores, and they'll say Jewel yams. They are not yams, they are sweet potatoes. People will use that word interchangeably in a commercial setting, but technically they are still sweet potatoes. So the good things about these is they are really disease resistant. They're one of the most disease resistant varieties you can find. They are also nematode resistant, and we'll talk about nematodes in a minute and what they can do to your sweet potatoes. And another good thing about these is they store very well. Sometimes you'll get a nice harvest of sweet potatoes, but when you store them, things can go wrong. So these actually are a variety that are easier, lower maintenance, because they're more resistant and they store well. The Jewel and the Beauregard. The Jewel is the primary sweet potato grown commercially in North Carolina, and the Beauregard sweet potato, which is a very similar one. I've grown those before in my garden. It's the most commonly grown in Louisiana, and these both dominate commercial productions. So they're very popular and they're very easy, and they're just kind of your normal run-of-the-mill orange sweet potatoes. All right, next I want to look at purple. These are some I have actually grown in my garden. You can see the little sticker here that was on my my Stokes sweet potato that I bought at Whole Foods. So this was an organic sweet potato. I propagated the sweet potato and planted them in my garden. And we have a video showing you those in a minute. The really cool thing about this purple sweet potatoes, they're pretty unique. You don't find them a lot in Delaware in stores. They have both purple skins and purple flesh. These came about in Stokes County, North Carolina, hence the name Stokes sweet potatoes. And since they are purple, as you know, things that are purple, like blueberries and those types of produce, are very, very high in antioxidants. So these are very healthy sweet potatoes for you to eat. They are a bit drier and denser than the orange varieties. So can't always be used interchangeably. You need to think in a recipe how you want to use those. I've used them in a lot of things. There's a lot of recipes out there that call for cubed sweet potatoes, and I like to actually mix up purple, white, and orange together in some of those recipes for a little bit of color interest and variety. And the next one I want to tell you about is a white sweet potato. The one I have grown, there's several varieties, but the one I have grown is the O. Henry. It's a variant of the Beauregard sweet potato. So it started out as an orange one, and they tweaked it and made a white sweet potato. These haven't been around that long, only since the 1990s, which seems like yesterday to me, but so these, since they are white, they don't have that orange, so they don't have the beta carotene of the orange sweet potatoes. They're not purple, so they don't have the high antioxidants. They taste great. They're just not quite as high of a nutritional value. I like to use them in substitute them for white potatoes in recipes because it doesn't change the appearance. I have a good beef stew recipe with cubed potatoes, and I use white sweet potatoes in there instead. And to be honest, they taste better to me, but somebody who might think they don't like sweet potatoes and you want to sneak them in, they're not going to be able to tell the difference. So this is my favorite white. There are other white sweet potatoes out there though. And for those of you who need to grow in containers or choose to grow in containers, this is a popular container variety of sweet potato. They grow with shorter vines. The vines are only maybe 3 or 4 feet long compared to the regular sweet potatoes, which can be 13, 14 feet long in your garden. These are a light orange sweet potato, the bunch Puerto Rico. They are great. They grow very well. I've grown these in grow bags and containers before, and they do great. If you see one advertised as a vineless sweet potato, it's the same thing. They use those terms interchangeably. So they'll be called bunch Puerto Rico, sometimes called vineless or vineless Puerto Rico. The only disadvantage to these is they are a little bit more susceptible to diseases. But if they're grown in a container, you have a lot better control over the soil and that kind of thing that will promote disease. Okay, you've made your decision. You've gone out and gotten your slips or ordered them and are waiting for them to be delivered. Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to do that now. Got ahead of myself. How do you get your slips? So all a slip is, when you hear the word slip, it's just a cutting, a rooted cutting from a sweet potato plant. That's all it means. You can grow your own, and I'm going to show you how to do that here in a minute by propagating them from your own plants. You can, if you have a friend who has propagated some and they have too many, they can share with you. Just make sure that your cuttings did not come from any plants with any diseases. The diseases will be transferred to your garden if you plant a diseased slip. So when you purchase your sweet potatoes, make sure you get them from a reputable nursery online or in real life. And hopefully you can find some that are certified or guaranteed to be disease-free. You want to be very careful with that when you get your slips. Okay, if you choose to start your own slips, and this is what I usually do, you find a potato. It doesn't have to be a very big potato. I tend to use the smaller ones for this. Cut them in half. Oh, and I also recommend using an organic potato. And the reason for that is if you go to the grocery store and you just pick up a sweet potato off the shelf in the produce department, it's not organic. Those are often treated with a chemical that will keep them from sprouting for shelf life. They want to be able in the grocery store to keep those potatoes out there as long as possible, and no one wants to go out and buy one. Well, I might, but most people don't want to go buy one that has shoots growing off of it. So they're treated. So find an organic one, because if you get a non-organic one, it may never sprout. So I cut them in half like you see in this picture. You don't have to do that. I have been asked the question. My sweet potato was laying sitting in my windowsill and it started growing. What do I do? And you don't have to go at that point and start doing anything with it. If it started growing on its own, then just let it grow. But if it's not growing, you can do this. It will speed up the process. Place the cut side in water, hold it up out of the water with toothpicks so it doesn't fall to the bottom. Keep it in a warm, sunny spot. It takes probably, some are slower to start than others. It can take from, 3 or 4 weeks up to maybe 6 weeks for it to start. After that time, if it doesn't start growing, it's not going to. If the water turns all yucky and brown, then it's probably rotting and it's not going to grow. So and at that point, I would get rid of it. So once the shoots grow, you're going to twist the shoots off, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a video, and put them in water, and then the shoots themselves will grow their own roots. And then when it's time to plant them in the garden, they'll be ready. So now we're going to watch a little video.
Did you know you can get a whole garden full of sweet potatoes from a little sweet potato like this? Just follow these steps. First, cut the sweet potato in half. Then, take 3 toothpicks and insert them about halfway down, evenly spaced, into the sides of the sweet potato. Next, suspend the piece of sweet potato in a glass of water with the cut edge under water. Keep it in a warm, sunny location. In about 6 to 8 weeks, or when your shoots are about 6 to 8 inches tall, gently twist and remove the shoot from the sweet potato and place it in water and watch the roots grow. When the soil temperature reaches about 65 to 70 degrees outside, you can plant these out in the garden.
Okay, and those that video and the other video I'm going to show you, the links to those were also in the document that you were sent with your Zoom link. If you need to watch those over again at some point. So now you have your slips and you are ready to go plant them in the garden. So your beds are all prepared. What you want to do is wait till it's nice and warm. The soil temperature needs to be about 65 to 70 degrees. I typically don't plant mine until the end of May or the beginning of June when it's finally nice and warm here. As you can see in the photo here, this was my garden a couple of years ago. I didn't have any slips. I didn't make slips that year. And I ordered some online from a reputable company. I'm not going to tell you the name of the company because it might have just happened to me. But they advertised that they would ship the slips at the appropriate time for planting. Well, they sent me these slips at the beginning of April. And this happened to be a couple years ago when we had a really cold spring. And I freaked out a little bit. So what am I going to do with these slips? I can't plant them now. They're going to die. It's too cold out there. So I put them in water for a little while. You can hold them in water or put them in some pots, but not for very long, only for maybe a few days because they don't like that after they've been out. So what are you going to do? I used as you can see in this picture, I planted them and I covered them with a row cover to protect them, to keep them from getting any frost. Any frost would be instant death. So I protected them. I tried to keep them warm. I probably lost about 1/3 of these plants because it just wasn't warm enough. They do not like cold, but there was really nothing I can do about it. I had to end up go out and buy some additional slips that year. So as far as spacing goes, 1 to 3 feet apart in rows. You can plant them about 6 inches deep if you have a long enough slip, and about 3 nodes underground. And as far as the spacing of rows, if you're planting them just in your garden, To allow room for the vines to grow, you can plant them maybe 3 to 4 feet apart between the rows. Since I planted them in a raised bed, I staggered them. So I have them alternating so they're not right next to each other. And it's worked out well for me this way. A quick word about companion planting. If you're, this is one of my things that I'm into, if you are too, just to let you know that sweet potatoes will grow well with tall growing herbs like dill and thyme can grow well mixed in with them. Other root plants like beets and parsnips will grow well with sweet potatoes. Bush beans and actually regular potatoes you can mix in with your sweet potatoes if you need to with spacing. I don't usually do that because of my space consideration. My bed is solid sweet potatoes. The only thing really that probably isn't a good companion is squash. Just because of the vining growing habit that squash has, you have a lot of competition there with the vines. So don't plant squash with your sweet potatoes. Once the sweet potatoes get started, for the first few weeks before the vines really take off, because when you plant them, they're going to grow underground first. They're going to put out roots before you start seeing a lot of growth on top. So you may not see them growing right away, but it's happening underground. So you just be patient and they'll start growing. But while that is happening, probably best to keep the weeds away. So during the first maybe 3 or 4 weeks, pull out all those little weeds you see popping up. But after that, once the vines start spreading, you don't have to weed all summer, which is awesome to me, not to have to do any weeding. The vines will choke out and they shade the soil, so they'll keep any weeds from growing under there. So once they start, they need very little water. You can go on vacation and leave them. They need very little care. The only thing that I worry about is the vines growing all over the place. So I try to control my vines by tucking them back in. I don't recommend cutting them off. That's where the plant is getting its energy to put into those roots to grow your sweet potatoes. So you cut the vines off, you're taking away from that energy and you get smaller, lower quality sweet potatoes. I have read that some places, especially where they grow perennially, they will harvest some of the leaves and vines. As long as they do a small amount, it doesn't seem to really have a big effect, but you just want to be really careful and try to keep those vines in check by tucking them back in, or you can use a trellis, something similar to what you would use for cucumbers, to trellis the vines to keep them out of the way. That works well also. So you don't need, like I said before, an inch of water a week. You don't want to over fertilize these guys. The compost should be plenty that you put in. Maybe if your soil, you'd have a soil test that they possibly could use some potassium just for health, but I don't fertilize mine. If you over fertilize them, especially if you add too much nitrogen, you get so many vines and not enough fruit or produce, sweet potatoes. So you get more vines, you get flowers, and not as many sweet potatoes. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about pests and diseases. We're just going to touch on a few of the most common pests and diseases today. For more information, I really recommend the North Carolina State Extension website. They have a lot of really, really excellent sweet potato resources there, and the links to those are also on the handout you received. I do want to say that I'm not going to mention in this presentation, but other than the pests I'm going to talk about, deer will eat sweet potatoes. They'll eat everything. They'll eat the leaves, the vines, the stems, and dig up the sweet potatoes and eat them. So that can happen if you have a deer problem. Rabbits will eat the foliage, and some of the other rodents can be problems for the roots, like groundhogs, voles, rats, and mice will eat those sweet potato roots. So those are some other mammals to watch out for. I am an organic gardener, so my best practices for me is to choose resistant plants when I'm looking for my slips. And you can see a list here that came from Oklahoma State University, also which I have given you the link to. And this lists a few varieties of sweet potatoes that have pretty good disease resistance. I don't usually have a problem with diseases. There's only one that I've noticed, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But you can get this list on their website. So these are disease resistant. As you can see, Jewel is on there. It's resistant to root knot nematodes and Fusarium, which is a fungus. The other good thing to do is practice crop rotation. Don't plant your sweet potatoes in the same spot within 3 years is probably the general recommendation of where they've been planted before. And that helps you avoid any soil borne pests or diseases that might have just stayed there waiting for you to plant your next crop so they can have at them. So crop rotation and choosing resistant plants are the best ways to avoid any pests and diseases. So let's talk about some pests here. Root knot nematodes. If you see in the picture here, this is what root knot nematode damage looks like on your sweet potatoes. The worms are so small you can't see them with your naked eye. They live in the soil. They live in water, and they survive as eggs and cysts in the soil. The problem with crop rotation is good, but you have to remember that there are a lot of plants, other garden plants, that are susceptible to root knot nematodes, including tomatoes, peppers, okra, watermelon, cantaloupe, onions, pumpkin, squash, corn, eggplant, beans, and peas. So in other words, you rotate your crops so that you don't plant these after you've planted any of those other susceptible plants in that area, which is a little bit hard to do if you have a small garden, unless you just leave that section unplanted for 3 years, which is hard to do if you're a small gardener. The other thing is to choose nematode resistant varieties. So as we just showed you on that chart, look for something that's resistant. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but it's less likely to happen when they're resistant. And this is what it looks like. The little worms will go in there and make these little bumps on your sweet potatoes or galls, and then they'll end up cracking. And the only chemical means of controlling them is they make these fumigant products, or I don't even know if I can say this, nematicides that will kill the nematodes. I don't use any of those because I'm organic, so I use crop rotation and the nematode resistant varieties to keep from having these, and I haven't had any in my garden. Another insect pests are flea beetles. You can tell if you have flea beetles because you will see shot holes in the leaves of your plants. The problem with these is not only do they eat the foliage, but they can spread diseases like wilt, and Fusarium wilt and blight can be spread around. They'll visit a plant that has that and then transfer it to your plant. You can use repellents. Talcum powder will repel these guys. Also, you can use the little white sticky traps. That's a good organic way of catching them. These guys are really small. They're only about 1.5 millimeters long. They have kind of reddish yellow legs. And the other problem they have is the larvae. They will go underground and make little tunnels on the surface of the sweet potatoes. And that anything you have that opens up the skin of the sweet potatoes can be just a door to let all these other diseases into your sweet potatoes. I have never seen these in my garden. Doesn't mean I never will, but this is one problem I have not had here in Delaware. These are sweet potato weevils. These are more common farther south, but with our weather getting hotter every year, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't appear here in Delaware. These guys will feed on the foliage and the roots. Their larvae will feed on the sweet potatoes, the roots. These guys will hide in the winter. They will stay in your stored sweet potatoes. They will also live outside in your weeds in your garden and everywhere around the garden. That's kind of a catch-22 because we're encouraged to leave some stuff in our garden to shelter the beneficial insects over the winter, but it will also shelter some of the bad guys too. So that's just the way it is. What these guys do is they will make holes in your sweet potatoes, and the larvae will tunnel into the roots. And the larvae are little white worms with brown heads. If you see any of those, you probably want to squish those guys. And this is my favorite pest because it's not really a pest. This is something I did have in my garden. So I'm out there one day going around tucking my vines in and checking out my garden, and I see this flash of shiny gold on right down below in there, and I'm feeling my ears because I think I lost the back of my earring because it was gold and shiny, and I hadn't lost the back of my earring. So I bend down and I look closer and I see this little insect. They're about the size of a ladybug, lady beetle. These are a host of sweet potatoes and things that are in the same family, like morning glory. So they will feed on those types of plants. I've never seen them on anything else. The larvae and the adults will feed on the foliage. But the good thing about them, I've had sweet potatoes here year after year, and that whole time I have only seen 2 of these total. So they're not very abundant unless you have really bad conditions that are promoting them. They don't hang around. They're kind of, I don't know, cool to watch for me. So it's not really even recommended that you do anything to control these because they don't, even though they can eat your garden, they usually don't. There's not enough of them. So that's all I have for pests, but I wanted to mention some of the other ones. There is a good resource also from North Carolina State University that I sent to you, which has a lot more in-depth information and close-up drawings of all kinds of pests that can attack sweet potatoes, including wireworms, various stem borers, grubs, armyworms. A few different species of armyworms will attack them, sweet potato hornworms, and then leafhoppers and spider mites, just to mention a few potential pests. But as I've said, I really haven't had a problem with pests on my sweet potatoes. So if you're lucky, hopefully you won't find any of these either. All right, I want to talk a little bit about diseases. I'm going to let you know I am not a plant pathologist, so I am definitely not an expert on plant diseases. But if you do have a sweet potato and you think it may have a disease, I would recommend that you bring that plant and that sweet potato into the office at Pardees Center when you have it, and have it sent off to our lab at University of Delaware so that they can find out, let you know what disease your sweet potato has. So most of the common diseases that you'll find in Delaware are fungal because we have the conditions that are just ripe for fungus diseases in the summer because of our humidity and dampness and rain. So a common one is sweet potato scurf. This is a disease that attacks only sweet potatoes. Doesn't spread to other vegetables at all. It's promoted by wet and poorly drained soil, which can also be exacerbated by too much compost, can make your soil too wet. And what happens is you end up with these brown patches. The picture you see here is a pretty severe case. So this, and I've had this on my sweet potatoes. I didn't know what it was, but the cool thing about it is it's only skin deep. So unless you're going to try to sell your sweet potatoes, they don't look pretty, but you can, if you peel the skin off, this will come right off. It's only skin deep and it's not a serious disease. If you store your sweet potatoes, it can get worse. It can make your sweet potatoes shrink while they're stored. All these fungal diseases, they'll live in the soil for 1 to 3 years, so it's good to rotate your crops. The spores will spread of the fungus. The spores will spread in soil and in the air and in water. If you are not organic and you want to prevent fungal diseases in advance, you can take those slips before you plant them and dip the roots in a fungicide solution. I don't do that because I don't use anything that's not organic, although neem oil, possibly. I haven't thought about using it on sweet potatoes, but it will also help with fungus. Now you have to remember, once you already have a fungus, no fungicide will work. Fungicides are preventative, so you have to do it before you get a fungus. So black rot is another kind of fungus. This one has multiple hosts, and crop rotation is the only thing you can do about it. It'll make your sweet potatoes be stunted, they'll wilt, they'll turn yellow. You can get brown and black rot spots on your potatoes and a bitter flavor. So that's not a good one. Another common one that we see is Fusarium. Fusarium can affect the roots, the potatoes themselves, and the stems, which is called wilt. So if you see Fusarium wilt, that affects the leaves and the stem. You can get swollen, distorted base of the stem, and on the sweet potatoes, you'll get black sunken spots and circular lesions and a dark rot that extends into the sweet potato. And this is spread by infected transplants. So if you get a transplant from the store, be sure you check it carefully and make sure it doesn't have anything, any spores or anything attached to that. This is actually made worse by the presence of root knot nematodes. So if you also have a problem with root knot nematodes, your fungal diseases can actually be worse. If your sweet potatoes have this disease and your sweet potatoes are injured when you dig them up, that also opens up the wounds, and it can spread through your stored sweet potatoes. So the best thing, keep that water away, have good drainage in your beds, and also good sanitation. Since the spores are in the soil, if you have dirty tools, if you collect your sweet potatoes in dirty containers that might be contaminated with the spores of these fungi, that can also spread it. So make sure that you keep everything nice and clean. Another type of disease can be a bacterial disease. These things are more common in storage after your potatoes have been wounded in harvest. So bacterial stem and root rot, this is caused by a bacteria in contaminated plants, and it will basically turn your sweet potatoes to mush, rotten from the inside out. So another one, bacterial soft rot, creates black lesions on the stems, and the stems can collapse, and your sweet potatoes will develop soft rot that turns brown. And this is really prevalent after hot weather, when you've had a lot of hot weather. And then the last of the diseases I'm going to talk about category is the viral disease. I have never seen this in my garden or heard of it locally, but there's a viral disease called the SPVD, which stands for sweet potato viral disease. It's actually these two diseases that kind of come at the same time. So feathery mottle virus and chlorotic stunt virus will exist together. So you want to make sure you have healthy plants, and these are actually spread by insects like aphids and whiteflies. So if you control those insects, be less likely to have this viral disease. As you can see in the photo there, one of the symptoms is these purpley patterned designs on your leaves. So that's a good sign that you have this disease. Also stunting, distortion, and the only thing you can do about it is pull those plants out and burn them. That's how you get rid of that disease. So hopefully that's a little extreme and we won't see any of that. Okay, enough of the gloom and doom. Now we're going to talk about the happy parts, which is digging up those sweet potatoes. Since they're a root crop, it's kind of exciting to get ready to harvest because you don't know what you're going to see once you look under those vines and start digging. In Delaware, as we said before, sweet potatoes are annual, so you need to harvest them before or pretty much right before the first frost. They don't take frost. If you live in an area zone 9 to 12, it's possible you can keep these growing all year round and just go out and dig up what you need. Go underground and dig up what you need and cut it off and let the vines and the rest of the sweet potatoes keep growing. Lucky you. So when you're ready to harvest, it takes for most varieties 90 to up to 120 days. I'd say most often I see varieties that are ready to harvest after 110 days. You want to harvest them before they get frosted. If they get frosted, you need to, by accident, you need to get them out of there immediately. If you know there's a frost coming and you don't have time to harvest them, if you just cut the vines off, you can wait a day or two before you actually dig up the potatoes. You just don't want the frost to hit the vines. So the first thing you want to do is go through so you can see what you're doing. You need to take those vines and cut them back to expose just the stems of the sweet potatoes. And then you're going to very carefully dig up the sweet potatoes. You want to be really, really careful because if you damage the skins of those sweet potatoes, that's, like I said, just a door open to let in all kinds of diseases. So you want to be as careful as you can. And then we'll talk about curing, because curing is a way of healing any openings that you might make on your sweet potato skin. As far as yield goes, I just want to tell you the average yield is about 20 to 40 pounds in a 10-foot row. In my 4x4 bed, that first year that I showed you at the beginning, I had 50 pounds. We took them all and weighed them. I had 50 pounds come out of a 4x4 bed. And in general, per plant, you'll get between 5 and 10 sweet potatoes with each plant. So that kind of can give you an estimate of how many sweet potatoes you can expect to harvest. So we're going to watch another video in a minute. Oh, let me talk about curing before we watch the video. Curing is really, really important, and I think this is the hardest step of the whole process. I cure my sweet potatoes in my guest bathroom with a humidifier and a heater in there to maintain this temperature. My daughter gives me a fit because she says, you're going to destroy your bathroom, but it hasn't happened yet, so we're getting there. So if you can keep it between at about 85 degrees or so, and as high of humidity as you can possibly get, it's very difficult to keep that humidity up in the winter time. If you live in a tropical area, a lot of times you can just dig them up and cure them outdoors because it's still hot outside and humid, and that works. So in Delaware, it's too cold outside by the time you harvest, so that needs to be done indoors. I let mine sit in my bathroom for about a week to cure. And you'll notice if you had a scratch on there that it kind of skins over while it's curing. After that week, you don't wash the dirt off or anything. You can brush off the excess, but you want to keep them dirty and to store them because that actually protects them a little bit. I wrap mine up in newspaper and put them in cardboard box, and usually put them in my crawl space because it's nice and cold, cool down there, not cold. If you have a basement, you can use that too. That's a good place to store them. Cool, dark. You don't want to refrigerate them because you can give them chill injury, and that will give them what they call a hard core. So they'll be no good. They'll be too hard to eat. If they're stored properly, you can keep those all winter. They'll last you into the spring. So for about 6 to 8 months after you harvest them. So now I'm going to show you this video for harvesting.
Fall is here, and the sweet potatoes I planted back in June are ready to be harvested. These are purple Stoke sweet potatoes that I actually started from slips that I made from a sweet potato I bought at the grocery store. Now, don't throw all these vines away. You can actually put these in water and root them and plant them in containers in your house or in a warm place to overwinter them for the next year. And did you know sweet potato leaves are edible? I'm going to save some of these for my salad tonight. At this point, the sweet potato skins are very thin and fragile, so I'm going to dig very carefully using my hands, and if I need to, a gardening fork, and lift the tubers from the soil. I'm going to brush off a little bit of the dirt, but I'm not going to wash these because you need to keep them unwashed when you store them. Here's my harvest, ready to be cured. I'll keep these in a warm, humid place for about a week, and the curing process will toughen the skin for storage and also start the production of the sugar-producing enzymes that give the sweet potatoes their sweet flavor. After curing, I will wrap them in newspaper, put them in a cardboard box, and I can store them in a cool location for up to 8 months.
For more information.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about eating those sweet potatoes. I know that recipes with sweet potatoes have been more commonly available in more recent years. Like I said before, I started growing sweet potatoes because my husband wanted sweet potato fries. If you have an air fryer, that's a great way to cook your sweet potato fries. That's the way I do it. You can also make baked sweet potatoes, or you can bake them in a crock pot. That'll work too. I have a great recipe for mini sweet potato pies. When I do this workshop in person, I bake them and I bring them and pass them out. Sorry, I can't do that for you now, but just you can close your eyes and imagine that you're biting into a nice sweet potato pie. There's many other recipes out there. I have cookbooks galore that have sweet potato recipes, and there's a lot available online. So you could eat sweet potatoes a different way every day of the week easily. And the parts of the sweet potato, you can eat all of the parts. They can be boiled, baked, grilled, sliced, and put in recipes as cubes. I have read that it's not recommended to substitute them for white potatoes, but I do it all the time, and it works out very well for me. The skins, I don't generally peel the sweet potatoes because the skins are very healthy. Like white potatoes, they have a lot of fiber in the skins. As you saw in the video, you can also eat the leaves. You can eat them fresh. You can put them in a salad, and you can saute them. The flavor, people have asked me about the flavor. It is a little bit of a bitter, kind of similar to arugula type flavor to them. So they're, even though potatoes are sweet, the foliage is a little bit of on the bitter side. As far as nutrition, the sweet potato has about the same amount of calories as a white potato, but they actually have a lower glycemic index. So they're healthier for you if you, less starchy. If you're a diabetic and you're concerned about your sugar intake, they have a lower glycemic index. So that's another reason that you might want to substitute them. As you can see in this little chart here, they're loaded with B vitamins, 37% of vitamin C for your requirement for the day, a lot of vitamin A, and vitamin E, and all these other minerals like calcium, iron. They're loaded with iron, potassium, phosphorus, magnesium, and sodium. They're good for all of your organs and your health, very healthy in general. Okay, that's all the information I have, and now I am going to ask you some fun trivia questions. So what we're going to do is, when the trivia question comes up, you have 15 seconds to answer it, and you can answer it by putting your response in the chat box. My good friend Kathy Doyle is going to collect those responses, and we're going to see who can get these right. So here is the first question. Kathy, did we get any answers?
We got a lot of answers, and let's see. Most people answered North Carolina. We had one Louisiana and one Georgia.
And the correct answer is North
Woo!
Carolina. So very good, people. As you notice, we've mentioned North Carolina multiple times during this presentation. So that was a logical answer. I have the information from 2016. I couldn't find it from an earlier year. But in 2016, North Carolina harvested 95,000 acres of sweet potatoes, which is 38,000 more than the next 3 states, which were Mississippi, California, and Louisiana. All of those combined, 38,000 more than all those other 3 states combined. That ended up being about more than 1.6 billion pounds of sweet potatoes. So though if you answered North Carolina, you were right. All right, ready for question number 2? All right, Kathy, we get anything?
Okay, wow, we had none, and then all of a sudden we got a bunch. We've got Great Britain, Spain. Oh, wait, who were the first Europeans? The British, the Spaniards, the Puritans, the Peruvians.
Ah, okay. Actually, I was looking for a specific answer, but this is the person that was known to bring them to Europe was Christopher Columbus. He acquired some sweet potatoes from the natives in the West Indies area when he visited there, and he brought them back to Europe. And that was the first time that they made it to Europe that we know of. So that's how that happened. So I don't know. I guess that could be called was he traveling for Spain, I believe, right?
He was.
If he
He
said the
was.
Spaniards, then he probably took them back to Spain. So that would have been what I would consider the correct answer. All right, next question. Okay, what do you think? Any answers?
Yep, we got some answers.
Okay.
Michelle says Washington and Jefferson. Elizabeth says Jefferson and Washington. Phil says Eisenhower. Megan says Washington and Lincoln. Natasha said Lincoln. Janine, Jimmy Carter. Pat, Jefferson. Karen Vicks, Washington and Carter. Lee B, Thomas Jefferson, Washington. And then Lynn Howard, Jefferson and Lincoln.
Okay, good answers. It's possible there could have been more, but the answer I have, and I know several of you said this, was George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. George Washington was known to have grown sweet potatoes at Mount Vernon when he farmed there. So it's probably entirely possible that the rest of them, I would say probably very likely that Jimmy Carter grew sweet potatoes also.
Mhm.
And did you know that growing peanuts will help your sweet potatoes? It will help deter those root knot nematodes. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. All right, next question. Any guesses on this one?
Oh, we got fries and pie.
Fries and pie.
Cooked fries, sweet potato casserole, and soups.
Okay, I was thinking more along the line as non-food items.
Oh.
So I don't know if anybody knew this, but they've used sweet potatoes to make adhesive for postage stamps, sizing for fabric, and dyes In South America, they actually take the juice of the sweet potatoes and mix it with lime juice, and it makes a cloth dye. So this list here, George Washington Carver, who's known for making products from peanuts, also invented all of these things from sweet potatoes.
Wow.
So a little interesting bit of history and trivia there for you. Okay, next question. Any guesses here?
Raleigh. Or someplace in North Carolina.
Okay, actually,
Oh.
Varieties, Mississippi. So they have this sign when you go into their city. They call themselves the sweet potato capital of the world. So there may be places in North Carolina that claim that too. I'm not sure. Also, I want to mention, like a little honorable mention, the city of Benton, Kentucky has an annual Tater Day festival, which is all about sweet potatoes. And I believe we have one more trivia question, and then we'll wrap it up here. I know we're going a little over time. Sorry about that.
Okay, we have a bunch of yeses and a no and a maybe.
All right, well, the correct answer is yes. They actually make sweet potato treats. I made these myself. I have a dehydrator and I slice them up and dry them in my dehydrator, and my dogs won't have anything to do with them because my dogs are spoiled brats and they only want to eat meat. So, but these are actually very good for dogs. You can give them treats. Another option, if you want to add fiber to your dog's diet, which is very important for dogs to have, you can cook a sweet potato and mash it up, and add it to your dog's food. So those are a couple ways to get extra fiber into your dog's diet if you're a dog person like I am. Just want to show you again the resources. These were all emailed to you, so you don't have to write these down or look at them. A lot of good resources on North Carolina State Extension's website. You have those in your handout that I gave you before the workshop. And that's the end. And I know, like, we don't have a lot of time. I hope somebody stuck around for questions. I am going to close my presentation here so I can see you guys and turn my camera back on. Hello, everybody. Kathy, do we have any other questions in the chat box for me?
Yeah, there are a few. Anita asks, does propagating a store-bought sweet potato violate licensing restrictions?
You mean like if it's a proprietary sweet potato?
I'm thinking that's what she means. Does, a company claim ownership?
I have never thought about it, but I don't know. That could apply to many things. Like if you go out and you buy an heirloom tomato from a farm stand or a shop and you save the seeds and propagate it, I think that would be kind of the same situation. So I'm not
I
sure.
tried to look it up. I tried to look it up while you're presenting, but I couldn't find anything. Not on a small scale, like backyard sweet potatoes. Now, if you were a mass producer of sweet potatoes and you took someone else's slip, I would assume there'd be some kind of a violation there. But I didn't find anything in the USDA documents that I was looking at.
Yeah, usually if you're not going to sell them, if they're only for your own personal consumption, I'm sure it would be fine.
Okay. I almost interrupted you with this next question because it was sort of right at a point where it would have been relevant, but somebody asked, what does 3 nodes underground mean?
Okay, if you look at your slip, you'll see little spots where you would, if you have house plants or anything, you look at them, you'll have these spots where roots will start growing. Those are the nodes. They'll be like a little bump. If you can get 3 of those underground, that's ideal. You may not have that many. So if you have any nodes, just put them underground because that's where it's going to grow from. And usually if you've put them in water and started the roots will already be there. So just make sure you get all those roots underground.
Pat asked if you have loamy soil, can adding sand help?
They don't recommend amending soil by adding sand. That's like you have one problem, you're just getting a different problem. The best thing to do if your soil is too heavy is to add some nice good compost and make sure that you have good drainage. If it's too much clay, which usually heavy soil has too much clay in it, adding compost will break that up and make it a lot healthier. So I wouldn't recommend adding sand. I'd recommending whether you have sandy soil or clay soil, add compost because it kind of brings it all together. It kind of gives you that middle ground, which is what you want.
Karen asked, can I use a cayenne pepper spray with water base to deter animals from eating the sweet potatoes if grown in the ground?
Oh, I'm sure that would work just fine. And that's a perfectly organic solution. If that's what you do, it should work fine. But generally, sweet potatoes are really low maintenance, and you may find you don't even need that. So save it for your tomatoes and things that are going to get really attacked by those problem insects. And unless you have a problem on your sweet potatoes, I wouldn't waste any of your organic or inorganic pesticides on them.
There's 2 questions about curing. Zoe asked if you could explain the importance of curing. And then Shebra asked, and I think you answered this, how do you prepare them for curing? Do you wrap them in paper or are they loose in a container or box?
All right, good questions about curing. They're loose. I put them on, I have like a little open shelf, like racks that I bought, somewhere really cheap, just wire shelves. And you want to have good air circulation. So you definitely don't want to wrap them up. I don't think I mentioned, but also when I put them in that bathroom, I put on my fan because they also need ventilation and air circulation. So humidity, warm temperatures, and air circulation. The reason for curing, and I know people who don't cure because like I said, it's a process. It's a little bit challenging to do it at home. If you're a commercial grower, they have all these big setups already, in process for doing this efficiently with large amounts of sweet potatoes. I put them on the racks, spread them out on the racks, and leave them there for a week. And what it does is if you dig them up, and sometimes you're trying to dig up a sweet potato and it's a little stuck and you end up scratching the skin. It's really important not to store it that way. So if you cure it, like I said before, you'll notice, you go back and look at it, if you notice a scratch, you'll notice that it's kind of grown over, kind of developed its own little skin, which is awesome because that's what protects it from disease while it's in storage. The other thing it does is the sweet potatoes have these sugar producing enzymes in there. So the flavor of the sweet potato will be even better if you cure it. Like I said, I know people who don't cure them or they cure them just by leaving them sit in their kitchen. It's not the perfect situation, but coming up with that perfect temperature and perfect humidity is really not that easy to do. And I just do it because I'm kind of OCD about these things, but it works perfectly fine to do it in as close to the conditions as you can get. So usually kitchens are fairly warm and humid. So that's where some people will keep them to let them cure before they store them.
So Becky also asked a curing question, and I'm going to guess maybe she'll be able to take from what you just said, but this is what she asked. Might it work to cure them in a warmer cooler with a hot water bottle or something? We have 3 little kids. I can't imagine keeping a room's temperature and humidity stable or ideal for the duration.
Yeah, the problem with that is air circulation. I don't know if I would put them in an enclosed container for curing, because they just having that lack of air can promote all kinds of bad things that we don't want our sweet potatoes to get in storage. If you have little kids, I would say that if you can find a spot in a room like a kitchen or a bathroom where you can keep them out of the way, would be the best place. I have a friend who keeps them right there on her kitchen counter for a week before she stores them, and that works for her. So it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have to be that crazy as I do it, for sure.
Okay. Can you wash off the sprout inhibiting chemical from store-bought sweet potatoes? I had mixed success using baking soda solution to soak and wash them before sprouting.
It's entirely possible. If you were successful and it's working for you, I'd say go for it. I've never tried it since I only buy organic sweet potatoes. I'm kind of weird about organic. I'm one of these weirdos. So I usually end up getting mine up at Whole Foods, and I know some of the stores here will sell what they call organic sweet potatoes that are all wrapped up in plastic, and they say they're ready for baking. I'm not too sure about those. I don't know what they have done to those, if they pre-cook them anyway, or what's been done to them to make them ready to be baked. So if that's working for you, it's possible that you could buy one from the store that wasn't chemically treated. You just don't know. If it's organic, it's not chemically treated. So, if it works to wash it, if you're having success, I'd say go for it.
Okay, Lee says, I tried growing sweet potatoes last year, and thank you for your Master Gardener Minute video, thanks. But the foliage that emerged was purple. I actually wanted that chartreuse green to add to my planters. Do you know what variety might have that light chartreuse green color leaves?
There's, okay, one thing, I don't know if this is what she has, but there are another kind of sweet potatoes that are just grown for decoration that don't have edible roots. They'll have just like small little things that don't taste very good, from what I've heard. Those are more of an ornamental type. It's possible that that's what she had. I'm not sure. I don't know of any. I've never had any grown that had purple leaves. So I can't be sure what that is. If you go to the some of these sweet potato variety links that I sent you, I don't know if they give you a description of the color of the leaves, but any of the sweet potato plants that I have grown just for eating that are garden growing sweet potatoes have always had green leaves and purple flowers and green leaves.
Okay, and is there a way to know which varieties clump underground versus run?
I'm not sure what they mean by clumping. So my experience of how they grow, you have the vines growing out from a main shoot, which is where you planted your slip, and the vines will grow out and they'll throw down roots, but none of those roots will produce sweet potatoes. All the sweet potatoes will be right around that main vine, and they usually grow. I used to have a good picture where I scraped the dirt off, and it was almost like a perfect circle of sweet potatoes surrounding the main root. And like I said, you can get 5 or 10 right around that one stem, and they're usually not very far from the surface. I've had them get stuck when they've gone down deep, when they've gotten too close to a corner of my raised bed and they've gone down instead of out. But I don't know what they mean about clumping, unless they're talking about just the ones that grow around the main stem.
Okay. And then I think this is the last question. What causes sweet potatoes to be so misshapen? She's grown some that were all sorts of strange shapes.
Okay, good question. One of the resources I had addressed that. Let me see. I think I had something in my notes written down about that. So it's usually a problem with the soil or the water. Too much water can do that. Yeah. Poor drainage can cause misshapen potatoes. Soil that's too heavy can cause smaller and misshapen potatoes. So you just need to make sure that you have the right conditions. In any harvest, you're going to get all different sizes because they grow at different rates. So you can dig up a plant here and you can get, 3 or 4 huge sweet potatoes, and then right next to them, you get these little teeny tiny things. So you can get a variety of from the same plant. That's why it's really cool if you live in an area where they're perennial, you can just dig them up as they become ready. But when you have to harvest them all at once, you get those teeny tiny little ones along with the big ones. And it's just a matter of the time, how long they've been in the ground and when they started growing. But the misshapenness is usually a water or soil condition problem.
Okay, somebody just squeezed in another question. What time of year do you start growing slips to prepare for planting? If I work backwards 6 to 8
Right.
weeks from the end of May, it's about mid-April. Is that right?
That's beginning of April, probably at the latest, I would say, because sometimes they don't start right away. If it's not, you can't keep them warm. They have to have warm. When I start them, I usually put them on a heating mat, to be honest, because my house is not that warm and I don't have a south-facing window at all. I have a really hard problem keeping things, starting seeds and keeping things warm here. But I usually start them more on the early side because that just gives them more time. So say you want your little shoots to come out, you may have your sweet potatoes sitting there for a couple of weeks before you see anything happen. And then once those little shoots come out, they may come out on one potato, and then 3 weeks later you'll see them just starting on another potato. So there's no way to predict if they're gonna grow shoots at all, or if they're gonna grow them faster or slower. So you have more opportunity if you grow them earlier. Now, say if you started one now, like today you went and started one, and say in a week you get little bumps, and then it may take they don't grow that fast, believe it or not. They'll watch them grow. And then so maybe in another month, you'll have a 6-inch sprout. You can just leave it on there. There's no reason you have to remove it as soon as 6 weeks come up. If you need to remove it, if it's really too big, or if it's keeping other shoots from growing, you can just twist it off and put it in water and let it grow roots, and it should be fine. I don't think anything will happen to it. And another thing you can do, I haven't been really successful at this, but I know somebody who has, is some of those vines that you cut off in the fall, if you stick those cuttings in water, they will root. And I have done this. I have one in my kitchen right now. It grew roots, and I have it in a pot, and it's sitting next to my little indoor lettuce garden that I have going, and it has one of those LED grow lights, which the sweet potato seems to be loving. So it's like growing right up to that light. So I'm hoping to be able to keep that one alive. It's in soil, it's in potting mix until it's time to plant, and maybe I'll put it out in one of my grow bags. So that can be done too. Like I said, I don't have the right conditions in my house, so I haven't been really successful, but it's worth a shot if you do it if you save some of those vines and root them in the fall and pot them up over the winter. So that's another thing. It's not an exact science. Like I said, you don't ever know how fast they're going to grow, but if you wanted to start them this early, it's doable. I would do it, like I said, the beginning of April at the latest.
So you addressed this early in your presentation. It's a question about, can you grow sweet potatoes in a container or fabric planter? But I want to just add a question to that. You mentioned a good container potato, the bunch Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. Does that mean you shouldn't try to grow, for example, the Jewel or the Stokes in a container?
You can, you just need to realize that you put that in that container, you're gonna get 14-foot vines coming out from there. So if you put it on your deck, and those vines will throw out little roots because they'll help to absorb the water. So I'm not saying it's not doable. I'm just saying that it's gonna be big.
Okay, that's good.